I walked into the bathroom thinking it was empty. My stepson was stood there in his towel. He turned around and faced me. His towel dropped, revealing his impressive figure. He did not seem surprised to see me, while his face lit up in excitement. I blushed, thinking how the moment we have both been waiting for weeks was finally here. The house was empty, and the night ahead was full of pleasure. I turned and shut the door behind me and walked towards him, my breath catching, my heart racing faster and faster. He walked towards me, growing with each step. I held him, our lips catching. The next few hours were magical. This was a couple of weeks ago, and things since then have never been better between us. Let me go back a step and introduce myself. My name is Becky Thompson. At 42, I still turned heads, dirty blonde waves cascading past my shoulders, green eyes that crinkled when I smiled, and curves that made my teacher's wardrobe look less than conservative some days. But lately, those smiles felt hollow, mechanical, like the ones I gave my high school English students during particularly dull poetry readings. But teaching literature had been my escape these past 8 months, since Mark dropped the bomb that shattered our 15-year marriage. "She's pregnant, Becky," he'd said, not even having the decency to look me in the eyes, his secretary. How painfully cliché. 26 years old, barely older than his own son. Now they live together in some modern downtown apartment, while I rattled around in our colonial home, drowning in memories and what-ifs. The only reason I kept the house was for Jake, my stepson. He'd moved back home after college, saying he wanted to save money while starting his tech career. But I knew better. He was worried about me being alone. Sweet boy. No, not a boy anymore. At 24, Jake had grown into a man who made my morning coffee runs feel more complicated than they should. Tonight, like most nights, I found myself alone with a glass of Merlot, grading papers in my bedroom. The wine made my skin flush, made everything feel softer around the edges. I caught my reflection again. Hair slightly mussed, cheeks pink, silk robe clinging to places that made me feel less like a proper English teacher and more like something dangerous. The house creaked and settled around me, too big, too empty, yet somehow also too small, knowing Jake was just down the hall. I could hear his shower running, the muffled bass of whatever music he was playing. My thoughts wandered to places they shouldn't, places that made me grip my wine glass tighter and cross my legs beneath my silk robe. "Get it together, Becky," I whispered to my reflection. But the woman staring back at me looked less like Mrs. Thompson, the respected teacher, and more like someone on the edge of making a decision she couldn't take back. Someone who noticed how her stepson's eyes lingered at breakfast, how his hand brushed hers when passing the sugar, how the air seemed to charge between them in quiet moments. I gathered my papers, trying to focus on comma splices and metaphors instead of the way Jake had smiled at me this morning, or how his t-shirt had clung to his chest after his run. Tomorrow, I would be Mrs. Thompson again, properly buttoned up and professional. But tonight I let myself wonder about all the things I shouldn't. The shower down the hall turned off. I heard Jake's door close and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 8 months of loneliness, of rediscovering myself, of fighting thoughts that made me question everything I thought I knew about who I was. And through it all, the one constant had been Jake, my rock, my comfort, my temptation. I turned off the lights, but sleep felt far away. In the darkness, it was harder to deny how complicated everything had become, or how much I looked forward to tomorrow morning's coffee ritual. Just the two of us in the kitchen, pretending we didn't feel it too. The storm had been brewing for days, both outside and in my heart. That evening, the rain pounded against the windows as Jake and I sat in the living room, the remnants of our takeout dinner scattered on the coffee table. We'd been talking about nothing important, work, weather, his father's latest absence from his life, when something shifted in the air between us. "You deserve better than how he treated you, Becky," Jake said softly, his eyes holding mine across the dim room. The use of my first name sent a shiver through me. He usually called me Mom, or avoided names altogether. "Life rarely gives us what we deserve," I replied, trying to maintain some semblance of maternal distance. but the wine had loosened my tongue. Sometimes I wonder if I wasted 15 years loving someone who never really saw me. Jake moved closer on the couch, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "I see you," he whispered, and my heart stuttered. "I've always seen you." "Jake." My voice trembled. "We can't have this conversation." "Why not? I'm not a kid anymore, and you're not really my mother." His hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "Tell me you haven't felt this too." The thunder crashed outside as years of suppressed emotions bubbled to the surface. "Of course I've felt it," I admitted, tears threatening. "But feeling something doesn't make it right." "What if I don't care about right?" His free hand came up to brush my cheek, and I found myself leaning into his touch. "What if I'm tired of watching you be lonely? What if I've wanted to kiss you since the day I moved back home?" Time seemed to stop. The rational part of my brain screamed to pull away, to maintain boundaries, to be the responsible one. Instead, I found myself drawing closer, drawn by the magnetism that had been building between us for months. When our lips met, it was soft at first, tentative, questioning. But then Jake's hand slipped into my hair, and something inside me broke. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and want pouring into it. For one perfect moment, the world made sense. Reality crashed back when we heard a car door slam outside. We jumped apart, guilt and desire warring on both our faces. It was just the neighbors, but the spell was broken. "I should go to bed," I stammered, standing on shaky legs. "This was—" "Don't say it was a mistake," Jake pleaded, reaching for my hand again. "Please." I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself. I need time to think. We both do. The next few days were torture. We danced around each other in the house, every accidental touch electric, every shared glance loaded with unspoken words. I threw myself into work, staying late at school to avoid the tension at home. Jake started taking evening runs, probably for the same reason. But we couldn't avoid each other forever. The kiss haunted my dreams, made me question everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. When had my stepson become the man who made me feel more alive than I had in years? How could something that felt so natural be so forbidden? 1 week after the kiss, I found a note slipped under my bedroom door. "I know you're scared, so am I. But what scares me more is pretending this isn't real. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Jay." I held that note until the paper grew soft, reading it over and over as tears fell. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure what frightened me more, pursuing these feelings for Jake, or spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I knew the following few days that my feelings towards him had grown stronger, especially since our kiss. Let me tell you when he first brought a girl home. The first time Jake brought a girl home, I told myself the twisting in my stomach was maternal concern. Sarah, or Sophia, some name that slithered with youth, all long legs and perfect skin. I laid in bed, pillow pressed against my ears, but couldn't block out their laughter floating up from downstairs. My hands wandered restlessly that night, fingers tracing patterns on my skin as I imagined their evening. Was he touching her the way he'd touched my face during our kiss? Did she get to taste the sweetness of his mouth that still haunted my dreams? I bit my lip until it nearly bled, my body aching with a need I couldn't voice. The pattern continued through autumn. Different girls, different nights, but the same torture for me. I'd lie awake, my silk nightgown clinging to flushed skin, letting my imagination torment me with possibilities. Sometimes I caught Jake watching me at breakfast after these dates, his eyes dark with something that looked like apology. Or was it possession? One night, after a particularly loud evening with a redhead named Amy, I found myself in the bathroom, gripping the counter as I stared at my reflection. My chest heaved with uneven breaths, hair wild from tossing and turning. The shower's hot spray couldn't wash away the images in my head, but it muffled my quiet gasps of frustration. I knew what he was doing, trying to move on, trying to forget our moment of weakness. Or maybe he was punishing me for pulling away. Either way, each giggling 20-something that crossed our threshold was another crack in my resolve. Two can play this game, I whispered to my reflection one morning. I started dating too, safe, age-appropriate men who bored me to tears. But I made sure Jake heard me getting ready, made sure he saw the dresses I wore, caught the scent of my perfume as I passed. The tension in the house became unbearable. Loaded glances across the dinner table, accidental touches that lingered too long, the way Jake would clench his jaw when I mentioned my dates. We were dancing on the edge of something dangerous, both too afraid to take the first step. But late at night, alone in my room, I couldn't deny how my body responded to the memory of our kiss, to the what-ifs that plagued my dreams. My fingers would trace paths on my skin, imagining stronger hands, younger hands. The guilt always came after, but in those private moments of release, I finally felt alive. The breaking point came after Jake's date with the redhead. I heard them come home early, heard their argument though I couldn't make out the words. Later I found out she'd called him by another woman's name in a heated moment. My name. He'd never brought another girl home after that. The conversation I overheard wasn't meant for my ears. It was late, past midnight, and I'd come downstairs for water when I heard Jake on the phone in the den. His voice was low, strained with emotion. "I can't keep doing this, Tom," he was saying to who I assumed was his best friend. "Every date feels wrong. Every girl I meet, they're not her." A pause, then softer. "Yes, Becky. God, I know how messed up it is. She's my stepmom, but..." I pressed against the wall, heart thundering in my chest. That kiss, you don't understand. It wasn't just physical. When I'm with her, everything makes sense. The way she looks at me across the room, how she smells like vanilla and coffee in the morning, how she bites her lip when she's grading papers. His voice cracked. "I'm in love with her, man. Actually in love. And I'm pretty sure I'm destroying both our lives." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I heard him continue. "She's been going on these dates. You should see the dresses she wears. It's killing me knowing she's out there with other men. But what right do I have to be jealous? I'm supposed to be her stepson." I couldn't take any more. I turned to flee but knocked against a vase, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Jake's voice stopped abruptly. "Someone's here. I'll call you back." I heard his footsteps approach as I stood frozen in the hallway. When he rounded the corner, our eyes met in the dim light. The vulnerability on his face made my heart ache. "How much did you hear?" he whispered. "Enough," I replied, my voice trembling. "Jake." He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I meant every word." "This is impossible," I breathed, even as my hand reached up to touch his face. "Is it?" His fingers wrapped around my wrist, gentle but firm. "Tell me you don't feel the same. Tell me those dates meant anything. Tell me you don't think about our kiss every night." I couldn't lie. Not to him, not anymore. "I think about it constantly," I admitted. "I lay awake wondering if I'm going crazy, if these feelings make me a terrible person." "You're the best person I know," Jake said fiercely. "And I'm tired of pretending. Tired of watching you date other men. Tired of trying to replace you with girls who mean nothing." The air between us crackled with electricity. His thumb traced circles on my wrist, sending shivers down my spine. "What do we do now?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "We stop running," he replied. "We stop pretending. Whatever this is between us, it's real. And I'm not strong enough to fight it anymore." I looked up into his eyes that had watched me for months with longing I'd tried to deny. "People will judge. Your father." "I don't care about anyone else," he interrupted. "I only care about you. About us." We stood there in the darkness, on the precipice of something that would change everything. The sensible thing would be to step away, to maintain boundaries. Instead, I found myself swaying closer, drawn by the gravity between us. "We can't," I whispered, though every cell in my body screamed otherwise. I need time." I turned away from Jake's wounded expression, hurrying up the stairs to my bedroom where I pressed my back against the door, heart racing. Sleep proved impossible. The house creaked and settled around me as I tossed and turned, his words echoing in my mind. I'm in love with her. After 2 hours of restless torment, I needed to splash cold water on my face. The bathroom door was ajar, soft light spilling into the hallway. I assumed Jake had left it on. He often did. But as I pushed it open, I found him there, wearing just his towel, leaning over the sink. Our eyes met. His towel dropped, revealing his impressive figure. He did not seem surprised to see me, while his face lit up in excitement. I blushed, thinking how the moment we have both been waiting for weeks was finally here. The house was empty, and the night ahead was full of pleasure, from the bathroom to his bedroom. The line had been crossed. Finally. Sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, highlighting Jake still asleep beside me. Last night played through my mind. His hands, his mouth, the way he'd whispered my name like a prayer. We'd crossed every line, demolished every boundary in a haze of desperate need. The guilt could wait. For now, I just watched him breathe, memorizing how peaceful he looked in sleep. His arm was still draped possessively across my waist, skin warm against mine. Then I heard it, the soft thud of mail through the slot downstairs. Stay, Jake murmured as I tried to slip from bed. Just getting the mail, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. I pulled on my silk robe, still damp with last night's passion, and padded downstairs. Among the usual bills lay a thick cream envelope. The law firm's logo made my stomach clench. With trembling fingers, I opened it right there in the hallway. Medical records review. Genetic testing results. Patient, Jacob Wilson. The words blurred as I read further. My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, the morning sun suddenly too bright, too harsh. Becky? Jake called from upstairs. Everything okay? I couldn't answer. Footsteps on the stairs, then he was there, wearing just his boxers. The sight that had thrilled me hours ago now made me sick with horror. What's wrong? He knelt beside me, trying to read the letter clutched in my shaking hands. The genetic test, I whispered. The one you took for that medical study last month. He took the paper, scanning quickly. I watched his face change as he reached the same devastating revelation. That's impossible, he breathed. But there it was in black and white. The genetic markers matched. A child given up for adoption 23 years ago. A desperate teenage mother who never forgot her baby's birthday. I'm your birth mother, I choked out. The words tasted like ashes. All this time, what we did, what we just... Jake stumbled backward, hitting the wall. Our passion-marked bodies, still bearing evidence of last night's sins, now held a different horror. I didn't know, I sobbed. When I married your father, you were already 16. I saw the birth date but convinced myself it was coincidence. I couldn't face the truth. And last night, his voice cracked. The sunlight felt like an accusation now, highlighting our shared features I'd been too blind to see. The same curve of jaw, the same hands that had brought such pleasure now spoke of blood ties that could never be undone. We stared at each other across the hallway, the letter between us like a bomb. The sound of a car door slamming outside made us both jump. Mark, your father's car, Jake whispered. He can't find us like this. I grabbed his arm. Get dressed. We need to think, to figure this out. As Jake ran upstairs, I looked down at the letter again. There was more. Pages I hadn't read yet. Something about legal action. About Mark already knowing. The doorbell rang. The doorbell rang again, more insistent. Still clutching the letter, I tightened my robe and glanced up the stairs where Jake had disappeared. I could hear him moving quickly in his room. Coming, I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Jake squeezed my hand once before stepping into the living room, out of immediate sight. Opening the door revealed Mark and a sharp-suited man I didn't recognize. Their expressions were cold, calculated. "Interesting morning attire?" Mark commented dryly, eyes lingering on my robe as he pushed past me into the foyer. "Though I suppose modesty isn't your strong suit anymore, is it?" The stranger cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm James Barrett, your husband's attorney." He offered me an envelope. "These documents require your immediate attention." My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, scanning the contents. Divorce papers, property agreements, a non-disclosure contract. "You've been busy," I said to Mark, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside. "Oh, you have no idea." He pulled out another envelope, the medical records I'd dropped earlier, but not as busy as you and Jake, apparently. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss terms." "Terms?" Jake's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the living room, fully dressed now. "Like how you forged medical documents?" Mark's face flickered with something, surprise, fear, before his mask of confidence returned. "Careful with accusations, boy," he warned. But Jake moved closer, phone in hand. "County General keeps detailed records of all study participants, including dates and times. Care to explain why these results are from St. Mary's?" I watched Mark's facade crack slightly. The lawyer glanced between them, clearly not privy to this particular detail of his client's plan. "Mr. Wilson," Barrett started, "if there's been some misunderstanding—" "The only misunderstanding," I interrupted, finding my strength, "is thinking we wouldn't figure it out." The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing between us. 4 people locked in a moment where everything could change. Mark stepped toward me, his voice low. "You really want to test me? See how ugly this can get?" But something had shifted. The power he thought he held over us was crumbling, like shadows retreating from light. The morning stretched taut with tension as Mark's threat hung in the air. His lawyer shuffled nervously, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. "Actually," Jake said coolly, "I believe we have some leverage of our own." He held up his phone. "Amazing what modern technology can capture. Every threat, every admission." Mark's face paled slightly. "You're bluffing." "Want to test that theory?" I moved closer to Jake, drawing strength from his presence. "How would the board at your firm react to attempted blackmail? Forged medical documents?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Wilson, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Mark snapped, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "This isn't—" "Here's what's going to happen," I cut in, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You're going to leave. Take your false documents, your threats, all of it. We'll handle the divorce through proper channels." Jake's hand found the small of my back, a subtle gesture of support that Mark didn't miss. His eyes narrowed. "You really think you can just—" "Yes," Jake interrupted. "We do. And if one word of your little scheme gets out, if you try anything else—" He let the threat hang unfinished. The lawyer was already gathering his papers, clearly wanting no part of this mess. "Mr. Wilson, I strongly suggest we regroup and discuss options." Mark's jaw clenched as he looked between us. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, highlighting how old he suddenly appeared. Defeated. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction. "It is," I said softly. "It has been for a long time." They left, the door closing behind them with a quiet click that seemed to echo through the house. Jake and I stood in silence, processing what had just happened. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes soft with concern. "You okay?" I nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "We really did it." "We did." His fingers traced my cheek gently. And now, I whispered, leaning into his touch, "we can start again. Properly." The morning sun wrapped around us like a promise as his lips found mine, tender and sweet. Whatever came next, we would face it together, in the light. Spring melted into summer, then autumn, each day unfolding like pages in our story. After Mark's departure, we moved deliberately, carefully. Jake kept his apartment for appearances while we navigated the divorce proceedings, but he spent most nights with me, our relationship deepening beyond the initial passion into something richer. Summer brought lazy Sunday mornings in bed, windows open to catch the breeze. Jake would trace patterns on my skin, telling me about his childhood dreams while sunlight painted shadows across our tangled sheets. We'd make love slowly, savoring each moment, learning every curve and sensitive spot until we knew each other's bodies better than our own. "Read to me," he'd ask in the afternoons, head in my lap as I worked on my novel. My fingers would card through his hair while I shared rough drafts, his feedback always thoughtful, challenging me to dig deeper into the characters. Weekends became adventures. We explored hidden beaches, Jake teaching me to surf despite my initial fear. The way he held me in the water, strong and patient, letting me find my balance. It was a metaphor for our whole relationship. "I've never felt so safe being vulnerable," I told him one night as we sat on our back porch, watching stars emerge. He pulled me closer, understanding the weight of those words. By autumn, we'd settled into beautiful routines. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. Evening walks where we'd plan our future. Jake's research was gaining recognition, while my novel found an agent who loved it. Some nights we'd barely make it through dinner, desire overwhelming us until we were tangled together on the kitchen floor or against the wall. Other nights we'd just hold each other, talking until dawn about everything and nothing. The divorce finalized quietly in October. That evening, Jake brought home champagne and takeout from our favorite Thai place. "To new beginnings," he toasted, eyes sparkling. "To us," I replied, knowing we'd already begun. Later that night, as moonlight spilled across our bed, Jake traced my spine with gentle fingers. "Move in properly," I whispered. "No more pretending." His answer was a kiss that tasted of promise and forever. We merged our lives fully after that. His books found homes beside mine, his coffee mugs nested with my teacups. Our clothes mingled in the closet until it felt like they'd always belonged together. Winter brought cozy evenings by the fireplace, planning trips we wanted to take, dreams we wanted to chase. The darkness outside made our intimate moments feel more intense, more precious. "I love how you see me," Jake said one night as we lay intertwined. "Not just my body, but all of me." "And I love how you make me feel brave," I replied, running my fingers along his jaw. "Strong enough to be myself." Spring returned, marking a year since everything changed. We celebrated with a weekend at the coast, the same beach where we'd first admitted our feelings. Walking along the shore at sunset, Jake pulled me close. "Thank you for choosing us," he murmured against my hair, "for fighting for this." I turned in his arms, watching the last rays of sun paint his face in gold. Best choice I ever made. That night, as waves crashed outside our window, and Jake moved inside me with exquisite tenderness, I knew this was what love should be. Passionate yet gentle, exciting yet comfortable, challenging yet safe. We'd found our rhythm, our peace. Every day brought new discoveries, new depths to explore in each other. We'd weathered the storm and emerged stronger, our love deeper for having been tested. And this was just the beginning. Our future unfurled before us like an open road. One evening in late spring, as we lounged in the garden we'd planted together, Jake brought up something unexpected. "I've been offered a research position," he said, fingers idly stroking my arm, "leading the genetics department at Stanford." My heart skipped. "Jake? That's amazing." "It would mean moving to California," he continued carefully. "Both of us." I sat up, studying his face in the fading light. "Tell me more." "They're building a new facility, complete creative control over research direction. And," he smiled, "there's a writer's colony nearby. They're always looking for resident authors." The possibilities bloomed in my mind. "When would they want you to start?" "Fall semester." He pulled me closer. but only if you're sure. Your life is here. My life is with you, I interrupted, kissing him softly. Besides, California sunshine beats Seattle rain. The next months became a whirlwind of planning. We found a Spanish-style house in the hills with a view of the bay and a room perfect for my writing. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw the separate guest house, ideal for a home lab. Summer passed in a blur of packing, saying goodbyes, and stolen moments between the chaos. Our last night in Seattle, we made love in every room of the empty house, christening each space with memories. The drive down the coast became our first real adventure together. We took our time, stopping at small towns, making love in ocean view hotel rooms, planning our future between miles of highway. I want to marry you, Jake said one night as we walked along a moonlit beach in Oregon. Not now, not rushed, but someday. I squeezed his hand. Someday sounds perfect. Stanford welcomed Jake like a returning hero. His research proposals drew excitement, funding, brilliant minds eager to join his team. I found my place in the writer's colony, my novel evolving in new directions inspired by our fresh start. We settled into our house, making it ours. Jake's lab equipment shared space with my books. We planted a garden with herbs and flowers, spent weekends exploring wine country, found favorite local restaurants where they knew our names. Did you ever imagine this? I asked one evening as we watched the sun set over the bay from our terrace. When everything started? Jake pulled me onto his lap, nuzzling my neck. I imagined you. Us. The rest is better than any dream. Autumn painted the hills golden. I finished my novel, Jake's research breakthrough made headlines, and we adopted a rescue dog named Luna, who loved running on the beach as much as we did. We should have a party, Jake suggested one morning over coffee. Celebrate everything. New home, your book, the research. The gathering became legendary. Colleagues, new friends, fellow writers all mingling under string lights in our garden. As I watched Jake charming everyone with his passion for science, I felt such overwhelming love it nearly brought tears. Later that night, skin glowing from wine and happiness, we made love under the stars on our terrace. Jake's hands and mouth worshipped every inch of me as the fog rolled in from the bay, shrouding us in our own private world. "What's next?" he whispered against my skin. I smiled, pulling him closer. Everything. Nothing. Just us. Because that's what we'd learned, that love isn't just grand gestures and dramatic moments. It's morning coffee and evening walks. It's supporting dreams and sharing fears. It's building a life day by day, choice by choice. I took his hand and led him through the living room. "Where are you taking me?" he asked. "The bedroom. Do you have a problem with that?" I replied seductively. He shook his head. I threw him onto the bed and climbed upon him,